From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
The fight to keep a way of life in Ukraine.
You know, people are simply trying to survive, and that's what they're trying to do.
One man is helping to keep Ukrainian farmers going, and he's taking his message directly to American producers. USDA takes steps to make sure the nation's beef supply is safe from avian flu, as wheat planting moves ahead at a frantic pace.
They went after it and they got the planters out.
The latest from the fields right now on AgDay.
AgDay, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when blood, sweat, and tears meet rain, wind, and sun. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Happening right now, planting is running ahead of schedule, especially spring wheat. We showed you that yesterday. Both corn and soybeans are now running 5 and 8% ahead of average, but wheat is also way ahead. USDA's latest crop progress report showing a whopping 34% of the crop is already in the ground. That's 15% ahead of the 5-year average and more than double where we were on wheat planting this time last year. AgDay's Michelle Rook joins me. And Michelle, you talked with one market analyst who confirmed that fast planting pace.
Clinton, farmers here in the northern plains have been out of the fields the last couple of days due to widespread rains like the event that we're seeing here today. But prior to that, they did make a big dent in spring wheat planting progress, trying to get ahead of that system. All of the states that produce spring wheat are showing planting progress ahead of the 5-year average, with top producer North Dakota at 20%, 9% ahead of normal. Montana at 35%, 15 points ahead. South Dakota at 62% is 26 points ahead. And Minnesota at 48% was 37% faster than average.
As far as planting conditions, producers saw the forecast. They saw that there was going to be rain. They went after it and they got the planters out and they got rolling last week with, just seeing a 7% more than anticipated by the trade for planting.
Farmers in all of these states also planted a huge percentage of their crop in just a week.
Minnesota was the best. I think it showed like 30% of its crop was planted last week for spring wheat. 28, I think it was for Montana, and then South Dakota came in with, I think, like 22% planted.
He says North Dakota lagged, only getting 13% of the crop planted. However, with the spring wheat crop getting rain right after seeding, that should improve emergence and yield prospects. I'm Michelle Rook reporting for AgDay.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And we have new developments in the fight against avian flu in dairy cattle. USDA announcing it has started testing ground beef for the virus. Now, that agency saying it's doing 3 separate beef safety studies. First, it's sampling ground beef bought at grocery stores in states where dairy cattle have tested positive for H5N1. Officials are also taking samples of muscle tissue from sick cows culled from their herd. Another study involves cooking beef to see how much virus is killed at different temperatures. USDA said it is confident the meat supply is safe and there are multiple safeguards in place to protect consumers. And testing is also going on involving the nation's wastewater system to check for avian flu. Scientists at Emory, Stanford, and Verily Life Sciences conducting a study, and they report finding spikes of influenza A virus in wastewater. Now, they say they tested 190 wastewater treatment plants and found the virus in samples from 59 sewer systems across 18 states. They reported wastewater samples in Amarillo, Texas, were among the highest ever measured in wastewater. However, the researchers say the plants sampled in that area allowed some producers to dump milk, which may explain those higher levels in the samples. But they also say the genetic material could have come from sources other than dairy cattle, including birds or humans. And they say more research is needed to understand where the virus is originating. And the World Health Organization is sounding an alarm right now about avian flu, saying that there is a risk of the virus spreading to cows in other countries due to migratory birds. However, the head of the organization's global influenza program said the overall public health risk to the virus is still low. It did urge vigilance. It's the news the biofuels industry has been wanting to hear: the release of what biofuels will qualify for sustainable aviation fuel tax credits based on an update to the GREET model. The SAF credit will be $1.25 for each gallon of sustainable aviation fuel. Now, to qualify, the SAF must have a minimum reduction of 50% in greenhouse gas emissions. Additionally, there's a supplemental credit of 1 cent for each percent that the reduction exceeds 50%. Now, the new model will recognize GHG reductions from carbon capture and sequestration, renewable natural gas, and renewable power used to produce ethanol for qualifying SAF. Now, it will also include a so-called safe harbor pilot program for corn ethanol produced with climate-smart agricultural practices like no-till, cover crops, and enhanced efficiency fertilizers. Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack says the announcement's an important stepping stone as it acknowledges the important role that farmers can play in lowering greenhouse gas emissions. The CEO of the Renewable Fuels Association welcoming the guidance, saying it will help the U.S. Treasury begin to unlock the door for U.S. ethanol producers and farmers, but said more work must be done to fully open the SAF market to ethanol. Areas that have seen severe weather as of late are back in the bullseye again today. Meteorologist Matt Engelbrecht joins us with a look ahead.
Yeah, we look at the severe storm risk coming up for Wednesday and Thursday. No surprise here. Locations that have had severe weather before, we're rounding it once again with more severe weather coming up on Wednesday, shifting again on a Thursday. But it's the red that we want to highlight, Oklahoma and Kansas, where several severe weather ingredients are coming together for several severe storms, so possibly for Wednesday. And that includes tornadoes, winds, heavy rain, and large hail. But even the few severe storms category, we zoom this out, it encompasses a good portion of Texas, Oklahoma, back up into the plains coming up for your Wednesday. On Thursday, the ingredients aren't as high, so we stay away from the several severe storms category, but we still a few severe storms that extend all the way down into Texas through Oklahoma, all the way into Wisconsin, Illinois, and up into Minnesota. Again, that's a severe storm risk coming up on Thursday. And day one of planting is in the books for Cindy in Holland, Manitoba. She says the first day is always bumpy, but that conditions were great, adding she hopes to keep the good times rolling. We couldn't agree more. I'll have more on your forecast coming up.
Prosecutors say they will not retry an Arizona rancher accused of killing a migrant on his property. 75-year-old George Allen Kelly was charged with second-degree murder in the shooting death of Gabriel Cuenburumia. The shooting happened in January of last year on Kelly's property near the border. Prosecutors said Kelly recklessly fired 9 shots from a rifle toward a group of men, including Cuenburumia. Kelly has said he only fired warning shots in the air and didn't shoot directly at anyone. Now, jurors were not able to reach a consensus on the shooting, and the judge declared a mistrial last month. Soybeans and wheat saw no turnaround Tuesday. In fact, it was a down day for much of the market. We'll talk about that coming up next. And later, from boots on the ground to conversations across the table, the whistle stops for Ukraine tour with Howard G. Buffett pulls through Oklahoma in the country. Soybeans and wheat seeing another day of weakness on Tuesday, but cattle also struggled. AgDay's Michelle Rook is back with more on the down day in markets right now.
It was a mostly lower day in grain and livestock futures trade on Tuesday. Kent Beadle with Paradigm Futures is joining us. And Kent, let's talk about the grain complex. Soybeans had a pretty horrible day, soybean oil as well, but some of that was due to some heavy deliveries, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had over 2,000 contracts of soybean oil delivered on Tuesday morning, and that was a surprise to the marketplace because in previous cycles here we have not had as many soybean oil deliveries with the onset of renewable diesel, and so this sort of harkens back into a previous era when we used to have a lot of heavy deliveries, and it certainly was construed as bearish for the soybean oil market on Tuesday.
Yeah. You also felt like maybe there was a little end of month profit taking, but we also had planting progress out. And how much of a role did that play?
Well, soybean planting progress 10 percentage points ahead of the 5-year average in beans and 5 percentage points ahead of the 5-year average in corn. And, we know in the Western Corn Belt last week that the farmers, really got after it because they saw the forecast, really wanted to try to get some stuff planted ahead of it. And we know they were active. And I think that, I think those were accurate numbers, although I don't think they're going to advance much this week.
It was a tough day in the cattle market on Tuesday as well. So how much of that was end of the month profit taking versus more of these H5N1 headlines that we've been seeing?
Yeah. So, 2 things. Of course, there were some new discoveries in a dairy in Colorado, that starts to get uncomfortably close to an awful lot of feedlots. And then, we hear from the USDA going to be testing for the virus in ground beef. And that certainly is going to scare some consumers, and really not surprised with that kind of a combination that the cattle market didn't back and fill here after what had been some better weeks here the last 2 or 3 weeks.
All right, let's hope cooler heads prevail. Thanks for joining us. Kent Beadle with Paradigm Futures. We'll have more Ag Day coming up. Watch Markets Now with Michelle Rook on the Farm Journal YouTube channel, keeping you updated throughout the day on the markets at the open, midday, and close. Find out what moved the markets today and what to expect the market to do next.
Yeah, I talked about it earlier, a severe weather potential in the works for our Wednesday portions of the United States. This is Wednesday at 7 a.m. As I put this into motion, you'll see the stretch of weather that is going to create some of those problems. And it's a combination of what's going on at the surface and then with the jet stream. You see a little dip right down here to the south with these lines. On the right side of it is where we have some of the better ingredients up above in the jet stream to fuel some of these storms. And that's where we go from just severe weather to the possibility of several severe thunderstorms, if not tornadoes, being developed with this kind of setup. So again, this is into our Thursday morning at 2 a.m. A lot of severe weather threat comes to an end, but Wednesday we do have to stay weather aware. On Thursday starts to shift a little bit. With, again, stronger storms extending back up into Wisconsin, down here to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, which is going to include Oklahoma and Texas by Friday, 9 a.m. Now, this Clipper system, is going to move more to the north, which is going to limit the amount the jet stream can aid some of these storms. So by Friday morning, Friday afternoon, cold front is going to be pushing from the west to the east with not so much energy behind it. So it's basically Wednesday and Thursday where that severe weather potential will be kind of draped in across the plains, as well as portions of the Midwest. What this looks like from the jet stream perspective on Wednesday and Thursday, there's the trough, that upper level low, that's going to be working more to the northeast. Now watch this ridge high pressure build in. One of the high confidence parts of this forecast is next week. Ridge of high pressure is going to limit any kind of storms developing Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday across the United States as we bottle everything up back out here towards the west. So a bit of a quiet stretch, but also a warm one to start next week. Let's go take a look at Shawnee, Kansas. Near Kansas City, I got some evening thunderstorms, high around 75 degrees, low of 65. Minnesota, you got some morning clouds and otherwise the evening sun, high around 65 degrees. Welby, Colorado, got some evening thunderstorms.
New answers in the case involving a missing livestock hauler in Iowa. Investigators say a body found in a northwest Iowa field last Wednesday has been identified as 33-year-old David Schultz. Schultz's abandoned rig was found parked in the middle of a road just before Thanksgiving. The pigs he was hauling at the time were still in the trailer, and he was just 10 miles away from his destination, a livestock dealer in Sac City, Iowa. Authorities don't suspect foul play in his death, and preliminary autopsy results showed no signs of trauma or serious injury. However, details surrounding his death remain a mystery. One volunteer questions whether the body was there the entire time or if it was recently moved to the spot where it was found, because searches were conducted in that area. Pork producers in Oklahoma are helping out those hit hard by tornadoes this week by keeping people fed. Now check this out, the Oklahoma Pork Council holding Operation Barbecue Relief in Sulphur. That's an area that was hit by an EF3 tornado. Volunteers serving up 800 free pork meals, and they also served up a free lunch in Holdenville, Oklahoma, which also was heavily impacted by a tornado, along with Marietta. In all, at least one EF4 tornado hit the state, along with 2 other EF3 storms over the weekend. Now, feeding people has been a big part of Howard G. Buffett's mission in Ukraine. Up next, a conversation with Oklahoma farmers about his experience on the front lines in the country. As the aid package for Ukraine's military leaves Washington, Illinois farmer and philanthropist Howard G. Buffett is working to help farmers in rural communities there survive and rebuild. In partnership with the German Marshall Fund of the U.S., in April, Buffett traveled to Oklahoma City to meet with farm groups and city business leaders as part of his multi-state whistle-stop tour for Ukraine.
The motion to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 815 is agreed to.
When our allies are stronger, we are stronger.
As President Biden signs the latest aid package for Ukraine, the war stretches into another month. With spring planting arriving, farmers there are struggling to maintain production, infrastructure, and markets.
As a farmer, when I travel across Ukraine and meet with farmers and go to farms, it's pretty amazing to see the devastation.
Howard G. Buffett has traveled to Ukraine on 11 different occasions to see for himself the challenges facing farmers in the region.
Keeping, fertilizer moving and seeds moving and chemicals moving and even parts for tractors and combines. I mean, that value chain has to stay in place and be able to operate. And I think it's got more and more stress on it today than it did, even last year.
At last count, more than 85,000 pieces of farm equipment have been destroyed. And the State Emergency Service of Ukraine now says 25% of the nation's total landmass may contain explosives.
Landmines are a significant issue across the country in terms of affecting agriculture, and of course that affects the economy.
During the conversation with agricultural leaders in Oklahoma, Buffett shared his view from the front lines.
One of the things that is kind of disheartening to me as a farmer is if you look at the occupied areas that Russia has in Ukraine, this last year it was estimated that almost 28% of the wheat production in Ukraine came from those occupied areas. So you have Russia using farmers in those areas to actually fund the war against Ukraine, which is pretty hard to imagine, but it's happening.
That wheat coming from Russia and Ukraine is an area of concern for Oklahoma wheat farmers in the room.
You look at the export numbers from the Ukraine area, there's still a lot of wheat being shipped out of that area. So from your standpoint, do you feel that's just grain they have in storage from previous years that's being shipped out, or do you think there's still a lot of wheat production going on in that country?
I've been pretty shocked at the amount of wheat they've been able to ship out. Ukraine is probably selling grain at below the cost of production right now, and they're doing it because they have no choice.
Their cheap grain is putting us at an extreme disadvantage because their grain is competing against us.
People are simply trying to survive, and that's what they're trying to do.
It was really enlightening for me to be, as an Oklahoma leader, to come to this meeting and hear what Mr. Buffett had to say. And I don't get in my tractor to go plow the ground to worry about a landmine. These people have bigger problems.
I think the takeaway today is it's eye-opening to actually be able to talk to somebody that's had boots on the ground, been there in person, talking with the farmers, individuals over in Ukraine, and seeing the things they go through.
As the war continues, the financial and logistical hardships are putting millions of farm families and businesses at risk.
Ukraine can't give up. Ukraine doesn't have an option. I mean, Ukraine is fighting for their freedom, but they're also fighting for their lives.
As the U.S. sends additional military aid, the Howard G. Buffett Foundation has given nearly $600 million in food, support, and equipment.
It's one of the few times, it's the only time, I would say, in my life that I had to decide, are we going to step up? And if we step up, then we have to step up big.
We all have a cause. What's your cause? What's my cause? This is his cause. But what's your passion and what are you doing? And so, to me, that maybe brings it to a little more home.
From room to room, city by city, it's a message from the front lines where the view of the war's real cost hits home.
If you want Ukraine to win, we have to give them what they need to win. We've given them enough to fight and die, but not enough to fight and win.
Now, the Howard G. Buffett Foundation and the German Marshall Fund of the U.S. are planning 7 more whistle stops along this tour. Up next, Pennsylvania. You can learn more over at www.gmfus.org/whistle stops. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.